my perspective is that the HR function, the people function, we've had a lot of people tell us what we should be doing. We have a lot of consultants that like to define what good HR, good people team looks like. We have a lot of academics that like to do research that says, here's what you should be doing to engage employees, to drive high performance cultures, to learn and develop yourself and your employees. I'd really like to get to a place where we as HR leaders are having that conversation for ourselves.
Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrell, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to the Workology Podcast, powered by Ace the HR Exam and Upskill HR. These are two of the courses, memberships that we offer for HR certification prep and recertification and professional development for HR leaders. This podcast is part of a series here on the Workology Podcast that's focused on the roles and responsibilities of that Chief Human Resources Officer, or CHRO, sometimes called the VP of People or the Chief People Officer. Now, this is an executive or C-level role that deals with managing human resources, as well as organizational development and implementing policies of change to improve the overall efficiency of the company. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to do this series, and we keep doing this series, is because there's so many changes and mystery around that chief HR role. So I want aspiring heads of HR to know the types of skills and experiences they need to promote into future Chief Human Resources Officer positions, along with hearing how senior HR leadership is partnering and collaborating with their executive peers. Now, before I introduce today's guest, I do want to hear from you. Text the word podcast to 512-548-3005. You can ask me questions, leave comments, and make suggestions for future guests. This is my community text number, and I want to hear from you. So today I'm really excited because I'm joined by Cara Brennan Allamano, and she's the Chief People Officer at Lattice. Cara joined Lattice in 2022 as its first Chief People Officer. With more than 20 years of experience in human resources and leadership, she focuses on helping to scale HR operations along with recruiting and learning and development at fast-moving global companies. Cara leads Lattice's people team. It's a global people team, and that includes talent acquisition, onboarding, learning and development, HR business partners, total rewards, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Before joining the team at Lattice, Cara was the Senior Vice President at Udemy, where she led the company through substantial growth and their recent IPO. In addition to founding People Tech Partners and Startup HR, Cara has held human resources leadership positions at Planet, Pinterest, and Adobe. Cara, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Let's start with some background. What led you to choose HR, and how's your career evolved over time into this current role at Lattice?
I had what I would say is pretty common for HR folks, but uncommon in terms of career planning, move into HR. Graduated with an English degree, got my first job in advertising, and then moved, said, hey, this is sort of interesting. And then I had some, but not all of it was interesting to me. So moved over to a finance role at Franklin Templeton. And then I started realizing, and I noticed that I was really interested in what the recruiters, what the HR folks were doing. The people side of business was something that even when we were talking about municipal bonds and investing like we did within the people of the operational group that I was in Franklin Templeton, I always was thinking about the people in those businesses and the impact that those people were having. So I said, when it's time for me to have my next job, I want to try this thing out. I want to try out HR and recruiting. And that time came, and I moved into an HR role in newspapers at Knight Ridder. which at the time was the second largest newspaper publication media company in the US. A few years after that, thanks to an activist investor, Knight Ridder no longer existed. But I can say, being a part of an organization that had so many different kinds of employees, folks that were frontline delivering newspapers, press men at the time is what we called them, that were printing, an entire go-to-market ad sales division that was bringing in the revenue, and a lot of really interesting journalists in the newsroom. It showed the breadth and depth of the work that people on the people side of business can do and the impact they can have. So that was really interesting to me. I had some really amazing mentors, and it was a great first company to be working in HR, because the product was directly, the value of the product was directly connected to the value that we put into the resources that we had internally. There's no question when they're handing out Pulitzer Prizes that having a really good journalist can make the difference for your business and newspapers. So I took that going forward and moved into more marketing and communication companies. And then beyond that, had a foray into startups and have been there ever since.
Very cool. I love the background in finance, because I'm certain that that's also helped you as you've moved into more of these senior level roles. I mean, even in the beginning stages of your career, like having understanding of the business side of HR and the impact has really been an asset, I would think.
It really has. And I'm writing an article about the relationship between the CPO and the CFO. And this is following an article where I was talking about the critical relationship between the CEO and CPO. And I think the first is something that we've all become familiar with. And I think those of us, especially in the trenches in the last few years in leadership roles in HR, have really come to appreciate the importance of that partnership between HR and the CEO, and the tone that CEO sets in terms of the value that HR can play. I think we've had a little bit more tenuous backstory when it comes to CFOs and CPOs, but I can tell you the folks that I look around and see as really amazing examples of exceptional CPOs are those who have only ever had very strong relationship with CFOs. And you're right, Jessica, we have to be able to speak the language of the people that we're partnering with, and the language of a good CEO is somebody who can translate and work both on the side of the emotion and the feeling and the values of the employees that they have within the org. They also, for a CEO and their partner and the CFO, have to be able to speak impact in financials. And the broader and deeper that we can get in any of these areas is directly correlated, I believe, to our ability to have influence in these areas on the CHRO side.
This is one of the biggest opportunities I think that HR leaders have, is that business acumen, that financial development piece. I just see it over and over and over again between HR leaders and the executive team. They're not able to communicate with each other because they don't speak the same language.
I hear you. And what I also reflect upon is a lot of people who have been the core of their HR careers have been in the last 10 years, haven't necessarily been well served by the expectations that businesses have had as it relates to financial efficiency and effectiveness. I definitely can say that I cut my teeth during a time, 15 years ago and beyond, when we were not in a place of up and to the right for most businesses. We were forced to do more with less. We were having to really have conversations across the board about ROI of our programming and the why behind what we're doing, and really be key influencers when it comes to helping people understand the value of HR. Now, on one hand, that was effective, and those are important skill sets to have. On the other hand, that doesn't serve the long-term needs of the business when you're only trying to fight for survival. But I can say the real flip in the last 10 years, which has been very or solely focused on culture and retention and employee experience, has left out the other half of that, which is the piece where we are those business leaders coming to the table, being able to drive the outcomes with the resources that we have. So I actually, during this downturn and even in the last 18 months, and have talked to other CHROs that have been doing this for a while, I see this as a huge opportunity. It's really hard, and it's especially hard when we're having to lead reductions in force and things like that, which are every HR person's least favorite thing to do. But those of us who have operated in these environments and can lead through this kind of change, this is where careers are made, and this is where you can have those real impact conversations with a CFO in a meaningful way, where you can sit on the same side of the table and say, yes, we both want this business to survive. We both want this business to thrive. What does that look like? And it's not just asking for money and wanting checks to be written, right? It's really that partnership. So I'm optimistic. I think this is going to be helping to form a whole another generation of HR leaders that are going to have a very balanced perspective and the skills to back that up.
Do you feel like the financial aspect, like the season I think that we're going through right now, is one of the absolute maybe requirements for that future CHRO, or is there something else that you think is important for maybe someone who's just starting out as an HR leader?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think yes. The short answer is yes. I think the other piece of this is what we've learned in the past 4 years, which is managing through uncertainty and being able to lead with a level of integrity and understand how to bake in trade-offs that are the best thing for the business and the best thing for employees. The future of work is here. Right? All the things we talked about coming down the pipe, remote first work and AI and skills graphing, and really understanding the dynamic nature of how we resource effectively with org design and org structure. All these things were accelerated during COVID, and here we are sitting here now. So again, it's an exciting time because the breadth and depth of the role has increased, but we are going to have enhanced skill sets to be able to accomplish what we want in these roles. And we're going to have well-rounded skill sets to get there.
I love that. And I appreciate your insights into this, because you've worked for a number of different kinds of companies, and now you're in an HR role that is high growth. So, and as you're thinking about building your own team out and building out and helping support the growth with managers, leaders, and the people, these are all considerations for future HR staff, future leaders, whether it's at Lattice or organizations, 5, 10, 15 years down the road.
I also think it's really important. My perspective is that the HR function, the people function, we've had a lot of people tell us what we should be doing. We have a lot of consultants that like to define what good HR, good people team looks like. We have a lot of academics that like to do research that says, here's what you should be doing to engage employees, to drive high performance cultures, to learn and develop yourself and your employees. I'd really like to get to a place where we as HR leaders are having that conversation for ourselves, where we are aligning around what good looks like for ourselves professionally. The blessing and the curse of being a people leader is that we, first of all, are dealing with humans, and they are not as predictable as numbers. So we have other folks that we sit with around the C-suite table, where if you're a marketer or you're a technologist or if you're a chief financial officer, they're able to sit there, and there's been a lot of work done over the past 30 years, over the past 50 years, to define what good looks like for those folks professionally. And each of those folks have had professionals in those professions stand up and say, I succeeded. This was how I got there. These are the things that I did. much of the work that we do on the people side of business is learned through apprenticeship, is a mentorship. We exist in a mentorship, apprenticeship type profession, which I think is really important, because looking at some of the experiences I've had, I can't get that from a textbook, right? Because you are dealing with other humans. That being said, this is an opportunity for us to stand up and say, this is how I've led through change. This is how I got these skill sets. This is how I built my financial acumen, and do that for each other. And I think a lot of times we've sat in the seat where we're the person behind the person, and we let other folks speak for us. And it's not super easy for me to go out and have public conversations. I went into a profession because I love one-on-one work. I love working with teams. I love internal work. But I'm doing this because I think it's really important. And I have folks that I've looked at that have said, wow, learning about their journey has helped me with my journey. So Jessica, just in a long answer to a short question, or a short comment, is really saying, I think this is the time that we can help each other in that process. And part of helping each other is coming out there and saying, hey, this was really critical to my success. And if you are early in your career or middle of your career, or in a spot where you feel like you're not able to get where you want to go from a career perspective, these are the levers that you should explore to get there.
That's why relationships, and I think like creating and cultivating a community, we're going to get to that here in a little bit, of some things that you're doing, is so important, so that we can have a dialogue with each other, because we're the only person in our organization, chief people officer or VP of HR, you don't have someone like you at another division that you can pick up the phone and say, hey, how are you dealing with this? We have to be able to talk to and learn from one another.
Totally agree with you. For sure.
So let's talk about Lattice. I think many people in HR are familiar with Lattice, or they should be if they're not. But talk to us about the size of the company, the team, as well as your organizational structure, and where does HR sit? Who do you report to?
Yeah, happy to talk about Lattice. You're right. A lot of people know about us, and that's because we have almost 6,000 customers, which is really exciting. And the company itself, we're about 550 people globally. We are a high growth company, so we are growing and changing and evolving. And what we do, for those who may not know, is we build employee experience performance management platform that is now expanding into a full suite. I call it a people operating system that goes from end to end. We do everything from goal setting to performance management to growth and development, as well as compensation management. And we just announced that we are currently building an HRIS. So the reason I'm interested in what we're doing is first of all, because it's a great role to be in a position where you're at a company that by default is serving HR leaders as customers, because on two fronts. One is, I do feel like there's a deeper understanding of what we do on the people side of business, and there's a value there. And that's a privilege and a luxury to be part of a company and in this role with that kind of company. The other piece is that we are our own best use case at Lattice. So we're using the tool to build our programs, and we're able to really be a part of the product development process in a real way. So in a different kind of position, I am tied to the business, and I'm tied to business outcomes, and I have a team that can help me do that. So really interesting and exciting, and different than a lot of the other roles that I've been a part of. My role itself reports to Jack Altman, our CEO and founder. I've had the privilege of knowing Jack for a period of time. I got to know Jack when he first started Lattice, and it was just a goal setting platform. And he's always been really empathetic and interested in hearing from HR leaders. So I was part of some of those early conversations as he's building, and have stayed connected. And at this point, I do think it's really mission critical that the HR leader be reporting to the top of the organization. That being said, I have been in roles where I have reported to CFOs, to COOs, to presidents. And while I think optimally reporting to a CEO who understands the position and really is committed to the people side of the business is ideal, I'm also not dogmatic about that being critical. I think it's really important that somebody report into another leader that is able to influence and support the outcomes of the people side of the business. And that can look different depending on your structure. The people team itself has a model where we have a group of folks that does people program management. My first hire here was a head of learning and development. I feel very strongly that has been my first hire in a number of roles, including Pinterest. And I feel very strongly that the learning and development of employees is the key lever that you can use to drive the outcomes you want as a people leader. So I think that's always important. We also have people operations, recruiting, people partnering. We have workforce under me, and we have DEIB, which is again mission critical, and people analytics. So we have a full suite of functional areas, and I think all of these are really important to the success of a growing business.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing. I'm kind of a nerd about this. Like, everybody is a little bit different.
Yeah, for sure.
Sometimes chief people officers oversee real estate. We've had somebody on the podcast who is comms reports to them. Mm-hmm. So it's fascinating to me how the different organizations are structured, and then who we report to.
Let's take a reset here. This is Jessica Miller-Merrell, and you are listening to the Workology Podcast, powered by ACE, the HR exam, and Upskill HR. We are talking about the role of the Chief People Officer with Cara Brennan Allamano, the Chief People Officer at Lattice. So before we get back to that, I want to hear from you. Text the word podcast to 512-548-3005. You can ask me questions, leave comments, and make suggestions for future guests. This is my community text number, and I want to hear from you. Personal and professional development is essential for successful HR leaders. Join Upskill HR to access live training, community, and over 100 on-demand courses for the dynamic leader. HR Research credits available. Visit upskillhr.com for more.
I want to move on over to some different initiatives that are definitely worth mentioning. I want to make sure we have time for. One of them is the Women's Health Benefits Initiative.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about what you're working on at Lattice around women's health, because this is really exciting.
Yeah, this is something that's very close to my heart. And my commitment to building employee environments that are inclusive, and particularly gender inclusive, was born a while ago. First of all, it's an area that I feel like I'm uniquely positioned to understand, being a cis woman. I also think that it's an underserved area, and I agree that we've made progress, but I still believe that every dollar we put into an investment to address the challenges that women face in the workforce, the ROI is pretty easy. There's a pretty strong line to draw to the return on that investment. And so let me share with you a little bit about that. First, when I had my first child, which was 11 years ago, we were in a world where there was not consistent leave, and there was very little support for when people went on leave. And again, I am in a privileged environment and being high growth technology companies. And it was just when people were starting to talk about the criticality of this. And what we knew is we were losing women consistently after they left for maternity leave. And a lot of that was everybody would throw up their hands and say, oh my gosh, well, this is just how it is. Women want to stay home with their babies. Well, when you went down and asked a few more levels of questions, it was actually women would love to be able to return to the workforce, but none of the work environments that we were creating in high growth technology companies were the environments where they could do that and do that successfully. So in brief, I started working with Clio, which still exists. It is one of a few different benefit options that helps new families, transition to when the baby's born, provides a lot of support, and then allows folks to transition back in. That was also paired with a revisiting of a number of the leave policies, particularly in the FANG companies, which are at the time was Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, which were the leading indicators of what was happening in our world. And so with that experience between the first child that I had, who's now 11, and the second child that I had, who's now 9, the first child being in a space where there were not benefits that supported my transition out and my transition back, where there wasn't a commitment to the type of leave that's going to help someone transition back in. And then 2 years later, when I saw the shift within the workplaces where I was operating, and the shift came, Jessica, when paternity leave was put at parity with maternity leave. And then at that point in time, I had a lot of men in the workplace supporting the various gendered individuals that chose to have children. And so it became a partnership among the different folks. And I saw the real power of that. And that's what I saw change the numbers. So in terms of women returning and women in our work environments. Now, I don't mean to underestimate the importance of other dimensions of diversity and their needs, but I'm using this particular one as an example because it's something that I do think I uniquely understand, and it's something that I'm focused on here at Lattice. And so fast forward, we got to a place where there were fertility benefits that became more common and are now ubiquitous in the companies in which I've worked, and in the tech companies. That is a benefit that we offer here. Again, what I find is really important is these are benefits and these are programs that all genders benefit from. I think we did ourselves a really strong disservice in thinking that a fertility benefit only serves a certain woman at a certain age. That's not the case. It helps create parity and equity. And anytime you create programs that bring equity to the workforce, that sends a really strong message to everyone in your company. So fast forward to where we are today. And this is where a conversation that I'm feeling strongly about is about midlife care for women. And the thing that is the most shocking to me is the direct correlation between women who are hitting the years where they may be affected by menopause and the ceiling that women hit from a career perspective. And in talking to enough doctors, talking to enough professionals who've experienced this, and then talking to other CPOs who are trying to solve for their women in leadership objectives, it's insane how much of a correlation there is. And it just really harkened back to this time when I was in a world where people were throwing their hands up and saying, well, women want to stay home with their babies. I think there's too much conversation or not enough conversation about women and the midlife changes that they experience. And it's time for us to recognize the fact that this is a health issue, that there are multiple areas that are affecting a woman's ability to manage through this in a way that where they're able to keep their careers intact and move forward, because there's so many symptoms and outcomes that unless folks get the type of support and unless we're open and having real conversations about the impact of midlife, we're not going to address this. We're going to have more people leaving the workforce or hitting what they feel is the ceiling from a leadership perspective. And guess what? There are benefits out there that can support women in the same way that there were benefits that can support women during or can support individuals during their childbearing years. And I'd hate to see this as a missed opportunity.
I love that you're doing this. And we actually talked about you at Lattice and the work that you're doing at the HR Technology Conference. Because I'd co-led a session on wellness in the workplace and just talked about how broad the category of wellness is and how it means so many different things, and programs like this fit under their umbrella. So I'm excited. I'm really excited to see conversations around this. I know that it's making a difference because when you talk about the fertility, Walmart last year
Yeah.
actually now offers fertility to every single full-time employee.
That's great.
Right?
That's so great.
So it's trickling down. It just takes time for the change to really start to move and happen.
Yeah. And I think this is where, again, as CPOs, we're uniquely positioned to draw the line between a personal experience and a professional experience, and to understand it at layers deeper than the surface. Because I think that is something that we as individuals who deal with people, if we're curious and ask a few questions, I again get very optimistic about the outcomes that we're able to drive. I also want to be clear that this is not just a women's issue. This is an issue for all genders. And when I'm talking to doctors, what I'm hearing is that partners of doctors, partners of patients that are going through midlife changes are as interested and as curious about the support that can be provided to their to the women who are going through these processes in the middle of their life as those women themselves, and sometimes more. I had a doctor say that she was giving a presentation about midlife and the changes that happen for women, and she had people of all genders and all ages show up, because everyone, hey, every biological woman is going to go through these changes at some point, if they are lucky enough to make it to midlife. And we, I believe, have a really great opportunity to unlock the power of these women who now have amazing careers to date, who can move through midlife and stick with us and help us continue to build businesses and do amazing things.
Well, I really think this is fantastic, and I'm so excited that you're helping move this conversation forward, not only for women in general, but as someone who is, entering, like, I guess I would be considered perimenopausal. It's something that I'm thinking about, and conversations with my husband and my daughter and my mom. And it wasn't anything that we ever talked about. Like my mom never shared this stuff with me. So I'm excited that you're starting the conversation, and I know it's going to inspire other organizations to make changes or even start to have conversations around this topic.
Awesome. Yeah. And you know what? I'm learning too. So I think there's a huge curve here. I'm super optimistic, as mentioned, after I've seen the impact of programs around parental leaves, programs around mental health and the support and the changes that's driven within the organizations that we all exist in, and fertility. So I think this is the next frontier, and I'm really looking forward to the impact that it can have on the people that are leading our organizations.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about what's currently happening, or what you're seeing in terms of trends in the areas of performance management.
Wow, it's been a wild ride over the past 18 months, right? Remembering COVID, when we had large technology firms talk about throwing out their performance management processes or suspending them, and then slam into where we are from a macroeconomic environment. And we moved directly into, unfortunately, some downsizing and reductions in force, that folks were dubious about some of those decisions that were made, right? The questions, especially the rumors around how it was decided around who was going to be let go or not. I think my opinion is that it uncovered some of the underbelly of not having effective performance management and people practices. I think what we know this year, and sort of a top trend, is that performance management and feedback and effective people processes as it relates to performance is quite literally is the number one thing that HR leaders are thinking about. And that's different than the past few years. So we have boards of directors, we have CEOs asking about, what programs do you have? How do I know who's performing? How do I know who's not performing? So from a trend perspective, I think it's easy to say that that as something that's become a key priority versus a nice to have is again at the top of the list. I think the other piece is that we know there are lots of HR organizations that are doing more with less. So this is where Lattice comes in, and this is where I think any effective performance management program comes in. We're looking for simple programs, but truly effective programs. And these are programs where you're gathering feedback on an ongoing basis, where you're doubling down on things like continuous feedback so that you're staying really connected to your organization. And you're able to do a couple things. You're able to say, do we have someone who's challenged from a performance standpoint that we as an HR organization can move in really quickly, work with the manager, work with this individual, discuss things like upskilling and get those folks back on track before we get down a line where we have business outcomes that are challenged or at risk because we didn't move fast enough. I think that's really important. And then I think the other side of it is we are starting to see some really high performing organizations. And this is what we know from environments like this. Some of the very biggest and best businesses were built during downturns. And part of that is because you have to get better at what you're doing with and for employees. So I'm hearing a lot of people talking about making sure their processes are shored up, making sure that they're truly effective, taking out any of the froth or the noise, because where we used to have 4 HR people, we might have 1 person now, and really leveraging technology to make sure that all of the clerical and administrative work that can be taken out of these processes are taken out. So fundamentally, the trend to me is really effective and efficient processes, a level of rigor around performance management that has not existed in the past few years for the reasons that we're all aware of. And then being able to support employees when we have flags of either high performance or low performance, so we can address things faster and earlier in the cycle.
Yeah, these conversations, they should be happening continuously, regularly, and not be a surprise when suddenly it's like, hey, performance isn't where it's need to be. Well, I had no idea. I haven't had any performance conversations in 6 months, 12 months. And people aren't happy when they are shown the door and they haven't been given a chance to learn or for themselves to change.
Yeah. And if you're going to build a culture of trust, and you are going to have the things that every organization wants, like retention and performance and impact, it's going to be about having those conversations on an ongoing basis.
Let's get to the topic that I'm really, really excited about, and I alluded to earlier, and it is the CPO Council at Lattice. Talk to us about what the CPO Council is.
I'm excited about it too, Jessica. This goes along with the initial conversation that I talked about here, and internal conversations I've had with my boss, who's Jack, as mentioned before, and my leadership team, and really letting HR leaders and excellent HR practitioners be the voice of HR and share best practices, share their insights from the seat. Again, we have a lot of people that like to share what HR should be doing or they could be doing, but I wanted to get a group of HR leaders that I'm quite honestly a fangirl of, folks that are on the cutting edge and driving real amazing outcomes and being innovative in their from where they're sitting, and have those folks speak for themselves and speak on behalf of the profession. And so at Lattice, we convened the CPO Council. This is a group of 10 people leaders who have had really strong careers, and I believe are going to have even more amazing careers going forward. And we want these folks, and they are up for the challenge. You're going to be hearing through blogs. You're going to be seeing them speak on podcasts. You're going to be having individuals share what is working and share their experiences, the what and the how, and to help be leaders for the profession, and to share the real tactical pieces of their day to day.
I love that. And I just feel like this is so needed, being able to connect and hear from our peers.
Yes.
And that's the reason I started the Chief HR Officer series on the Workology podcast, because during the pandemic, we were all at home. We weren't traveling anywhere, and we were dealing with some stuff unprecedented. So this is an opportunity for everyone to get together and have a conversation about what's working. And then with what sounds like with the council, you'll be able to share more resources with more HR people. So they're going to get some learning and conversation started in their own, circles, which is fantastic.
Yeah, Jessica, as you mentioned before, this can be a lonely job sometimes, right? And I can say that my network, and knowing that I have folks that are in similar roles, I have a phone call I can make, a text I can go back and forth with. Those are the things that lead to a sense of real longevity in our profession. And I think in a different way than many other professions, we benefit from understanding the real life experiences of each other that we have in our positions, because so much of what we deal with, while individuals are unique, dealing with the emotions and the impact that people are facing from these external challenges like COVID, like the wars that we're seeing abroad outside the US and beyond. It's really important for us to understand how to give ourselves options in terms of how to address these things, and to see what has worked for other people so we can bring that back to our employees.
I love it. I'm so glad that you're doing this, and I can't wait to see it go out into the wild and hear from all these amazing chief people officers about what they're working on, their thoughts and experiences. So that's fantastic.
It's awesome.
It's going to be great. I think it's so needed right now in the space. What is the best advice that you can offer for HR leaders who are maybe struggling with performance objectives? Just give us a little bit of insight into this, because I think a lot of us are, like you said, headcounts are lower. We're dealing with a really challenging time that for many HR leaders is also unprecedented with the economic downturn.
Yeah. I think I always start with what are the business outcomes you're trying to drive, and then working backward from that. Our jobs are very hard because we're dealing with the needs of the needs of the individuals that we have as employees, their family members, as well as the other stakeholders that we have, the board of directors, our own CEOs. So really getting to a place of ruthless focus, I think, is what is the only way through the next 12 months. And it's something I've had to do. We're in the middle of our planning process at Lattice, and I have a nice to have list that's pages long. But when I look at the business outcomes I want to drive for next year, what I want to deliver in terms of employee experience, it's really about narrowing down those outcomes, those lists of nice to haves to the few pieces that I know are going to drive and the outcomes from a business perspective, which are important. The other thing that I always like to talk about is really building the partnership with other C-suite executives and asking the question, what do you need from the people side of the business? I think the answer and what we know is right now people are looking at driving the level of impact and performance from those employees. And Jessica, what's really interesting to me is while much of this feels like a shift, it feels like for many folks who've only been in HR for the last 10 years, when things have been up and to the right, economically, not necessarily in terms of the challenges we face with things like COVID. For me, it is really a back to basics moment. What we talked about in terms of what good performance management looks like, it's really similar to when I started 25 years ago. It's having open discussions about how people are doing their work. It's as a manager being that manager coach. It's providing regular, consistent feedback. So if we're really looking at what are the top 3 priorities that we can focus on as an HR organization, as a people organization, and how that ties to the business outcomes, then for me, it's about taking those priorities and digging into the how of that, right? And how do we do that with the resources we have? And the good news there is that the how has not changed. It's perennial. It's how do we make sure that we have managers that feel supported? How do we make sure we're really communicating to employees about what the business needs to deliver this year, and that we're setting expectations that are realistic for employees and clear to employees. So similarly, we've at Lattice gone back to a place where we're looking to drive a lot of simplicity in our work, but continue to have high touch by enabling our managers and our leaders to have those discussions about expectation and performance with our employees.
Such great sound advice. Back to basics. I think that's really what a lot of us are doing right now. And there's nothing wrong with that, because when things start to move forward again and we start to increase sales and things take off, all our processes and systems and the basics that we put together now, they're going to be ready, and we'll be able to scale really quickly and effectively in supporting our organizations.
Yes. And I think in some ways, it's uncomfortable to go back to basics, right? Because we've really been pushing the innovation envelope in the past decade, but this is where if we're asking, how do we support our employees? How do we manage with the resources we have? That's really what it comes down to. I think the thing to not forget when we go back to basics is that we do have technologies like Lattice, even ChatGPT, others that can assist us and make those enhance those basics. But going back to what are the key levers that I can pull to get to the business outcomes that need to happen, I think we all inherently know that, and it's about having the courage to say no to the things that aren't going to drive the outcomes and say yes to the level of work that we know we can take on as a team and do well.
Well, thank you again for your insights. It was a great conversation. I really appreciate it. For those who are listening, we will link to Cara's LinkedIn profile as well as her career site in case you want to apply for any openings that she has on her HR team, as well as other resources to really help you maybe step into a future chief people officer position. So thank you so much, Cara, for your time. Any last words or parting thoughts?
I love what you're doing. I love that you're out there speaking for HR people by HR people. So thank you for your work.
Well, I love what I do. It's not work when you love what you do,
That's true. That's very
Thank
true.
you so much for your time. And I look forward to getting an update on all the things that we've talked about soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'm such a nerd about this topic. I love hearing from heads of HR, chief people officers, chief human resources officers about their experiences and kind of connecting that HR to the strategy and operation of the overall business. HR is changing, and it's changing quickly to support the organization. HR doesn't just lead within a company. The company is depending on us as leaders to set the standards and benchmarks for everything from company values to learning and development. I appreciate Cara taking the time to chat with us today. They're doing a lot of exciting things at Lattice, and I can't wait to catch up with her again. It is so true what she said about HR being an apprenticeship, because my entire HR career has been defined by these learning moments that I couldn't have read about in a book or attending a class. So you really have to have solid mentors, a strong community of fellow HR people and or coach to help support you throughout your career. Thank you for joining the podcast. I would love to get your insights, suggestions, and comments on the podcast. So you can text the word podcast to 512-548 888-888-3005. This is my community text number. I do want to hear from you. Again, thank you for joining the Workology Podcast. It's powered by Upskill HR and Ace the HR Exam. This podcast is for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. I'm tired of it. You're tired of it. Let's change HR together. My name is Jessica Miller-Merrell. Until next time, you can visit Workology.com to listen to all our previous Workology podcast episodes. There are over 400. So I've been doing this for a little bit. Tune in and let me know how I can support you in your HR journey. Have a great day.